So this thing's working, I hope. So I foreshadowed this morning that I was going to talk about the streamlined investment approval process. Sorry I did that. I know the anticipation must have been killing you. You've had to wait a long time to get to this, but we'll have a run through and we'll see if we can't walk you through it. VCDF was good enough to give me a bit of a lead-in. He did talk about it a little bit in his presentation, and I just want to expand on a few of the things that he said. And this thing does actually work for all those that were asking the guy down the front to hit the arrow key. Right, so CLC refresher. We sort of did this morning, and I don't want to go through it. I don't want to go through it again for those. I think the crowd's thinned out a little bit, so we might actually have time for questions at the end of this. I won't go through those again. I want to talk about tailoring and what we're trying to achieve through that. I want to give a quick recap on what FPR said about our approval process and why we need to do this. And then I will try to get us some time back, I think. We're running late, so I will try to bolt through it a little bit. Okay. Talked about centralised direction this morning, talked about ongoing force design all day today. We've talked about contestability. I want to talk about the streamlined process, and I want to talk about tailoring of the project investment approval pathways. And to do that, I'll start with what FPR said about us. All of that says we're really slow. All of that says we don't tailor we don't tailor for whatever the capability proposal is that we're trying to take to government. A lot of the things that we took up, as it says there, 50% of the things that we took to government that we made government consider were worth about 6% of the total program costs. So lots of volume for not a lot of impact potentially. Individual project approvals lack the proper strategic context. I have talked about program approvals this morning. I will talk a little bit more about it again now. And it really is about that context piece. Michael Shoebridge picked up on it when he talked contestability. The VCDF also picked up on it. Common theme, government has not had the sort of context that it's needed from us for a long time. And then that last stat there, long submissions, characterised by a lot of military jargon, a lot of bureaucratic jargon, no use of simplistic language that really describes what we're trying to achieve. So what did they say? They said we need to review the two-pass process. They said that we need to look at a way to fast-track processes. So pretty much everything, whether you are a project, so if I take the financial thresholds, $100 million, you could be a project, as VCDF said, a project doing plumbing, toilets, whatever, on a base, low risk, well-known, well understood, no industry issues, no strategic issues, no political issues other than whether it's in a marginal electorate or the PM's electorate. And it would go through the same process, the same consideration by government that a submarine would go through, or that a future frigate would go through, or that any of these really complex projects would go through. We didn't sort of try to take a look at it and say, well, what is risk characteristics? What does that mean for us? So that's where we've tried to go. The FPR recommended that we change the thresholds. So the old thresholds, and most people in this room will know it, were governed by the budget process operational rules. So up to $20 million, one minister. Above 20 to 100 was two ministers. For us, that means Minister for Defence and Minister for Defence Industry and the Minister for Finance. And then over 100 million NSC. So they recommended an increase in those thresholds so that we were putting less and less through NSC with more decision rights at the two-minister level. That's ultimately what we're trying to achieve. I'm not going to read that out, but it was really about shortening the approval process and tailoring around individual proposals so that we weren't taking the transactional stuff to NSC. We were really trying to bring it up to that strategic level. We went a bit further than that in a lot of ways. And I will come to how we did that, but as we stand here today, what we have is a government-approved streamlined approval process that was done sort of the middle of this year, co-sponsored with the Department of Finance. So it was probably the first in a very, very long time that we've had a co-sponsored cabinet submission with the Department of Finance, not co-ordered against at all by any of the other agencies and fully supported by PM&C, who also helped draft it, and built around smart buy decisions. So we've talked variously around smart buy today. I'll talk in a little bit more detail around, we took a subset of smart buyer. I'll talk in a little bit more detail around the categories that we've chosen from smart buyer to use with our streamlined process. So really two things we tried to address in this submission, and which have now been agreed. The first is, what's the fastest, most practical, most pragmatic way to take something to government, and who do we need to take it to? We have a truncated process. Do we go to 2 ministers? Do we go to NSC? And then the second part of it was this concept of capability streams and capability programs. Now, we took the white paper up, and it's, the published version is along streamlines. In this submission, we explicitly asked government to give us authority to bring forward for consideration program level submissions and capability stream submissions. They actually came back to us and said, yeah, we want you to bring those up, and we sort of don't want you to bring individual projects up unless you absolutely have to. The language is a little bit different. I'm emphasising it, but that's kind of the sense of it. This program level stuff and this stream level stuff really is bringing it up to that strategic level and giving the context the government needs to understand capabilities, capability effects, rather than just sort of onesies and twosies, widgets, platforms, etc. So we're playing in this space. I won't go back through the 4 chevrons. We had to talk about that this morning. And underneath that is, this is very simplistic, but I'll have a talk about each of these and then we'll get into a bit more. Non-complex with a bunch of other criteria added to it. What we're looking at doing is truncating the approval process for those, potentially not needing a gate 1 submission or a first pass submission, being able to go directly to second pass. There's a bunch of implications, and I'll show you the criteria for that in a moment. For those things that are more complex, traditional first, second pass process. So, and I still think, personally, most of the things that we do initially will be a 1-2 process. We'll see some benefits off the back end of that I will talk about later. And then if you've got those strategically significant and very complex programs, think sort of national endeavour type stuff, you're going to have multiple approvals. So it's going to be a rolling wave of, potentially a rolling wave of approvals. So government is going to remain interested in those things. They are strategically significant for government. They're going to want to see it. They're going to want regular updates. And that goes to the heart of this ongoing dialogue we've talked about with government, external agencies, industry, etc. So, 2 things. Who approves it? And how many approvals, right? So there's going to be NSC, 2 minister, 1 minister, internal to defence. I think in time, this is my view, in time we will get, once we rebuild that trust deficit with government, we will get closer to having a lot more things done internally, particularly as we get good at stream submissions, where we're forecasting to government the sorts of things that are coming down range, forecasting the sorts of risks around those things. I think we will see a lot more of that authority being delegated back to the department to make decisions. Perhaps not at first pass. Maybe there's an initial strategic discussion. Second pass might be, well, that's just the acquisition of the thing that you've already told us about. You can make that call in your own right. We're not there yet, but I think there is every chance we'll get there if we continue to do the right things. And then obviously how many approvals does it need to be? This 2-pass, combined pass, multiple approaches, or rolling wave tranches. The last one for me is a bit like a sustainment activity rather than a capital acquisition activity. There are a bunch of things we do that lend themselves to that, where we sort of go to government, we say, okay, we want approval to do this bit now, we're going to come back to you for the next bit, and you keep coming up, keep getting separate approvals for things. EO could be a good example of that. A lot of the facility stuff that we do could be a good example of that, like airfield repair, those sorts of things do lend themselves to that. Things where technology changes a bit as well, where you don't know what the next 3 or 5 years looks like, lend themselves to that last approach. So, VCDF mentioned that we do all this in close collaboration with central agencies. Absolutely true. Right now, my guys are back in R3 running a workshop. This is the internal workshop, running a workshop with capability managers, working on 2018-19's forward work plan, what that's going to look like, what the pathway for those projects are going to be. This is the basis upon which we make that risk assessment. So, high risk against these criteria gets you into NSC. And I think that's fair, right? The bottom one is particularly important, industrial, strategic. When we say strategic, think political as well. That's one of the key considerations at that point. So if there are high risks here, if it's a hard political sell, all of those sorts of things will come into it. You can see we haven't dropped financial completely. There are no strict thresholds, but if something's a $50 billion project, pretty much you know where it's going to go. But we use all of those and we make an assessment against each of those criteria. It is a subset of the smart buyer process. And we're using the smart buyer workshops to actually help inform this. We make an assessment against those and we use that to determine where we think this thing should go. So who should be approving it? We did that for the 17-18 Forward Work Plan. In fact, we did that in the white paper context for 16-17 under a less well-defined process. This is now an agreed process. Those workshops, so we're doing the internal one now, we will do the workshop with central agencies who have a say. It goes to, so obviously there's always governance arrangements around these sorts of things. So we will propose to government what we think the pathway should be. As we develop more knowledge about the capability proposal, the submission, it will go through the investment committee. The investment committee will review. They will look at what we've said. They will look at what's changed. They will look at what we've been able to mitigate. And they will make a call on whether or not the original pathway holds or whether or not we actually need to do something else. So, you know, we thought something was low risk. Actually, it's got a high level of integration risk. We're not quite happy that it's going to go to 2 ministers. It should go to NSC. Those sorts of things can happen. And then we use the biennial update as a mechanism for advising government, to the extent that timing works, for advising government about changes in that plan. Right, so fast track. So this was an interesting, there was a lot of debate about this when we started talking about fast track. I think there was some careless words in and around kind of FPR and careless language that sort of implied everything should be on some sort of fast track. That would be the default setting. What we're talking about is where it makes sense, judicious use of a fast track process. So these are the sorts of criteria where that we're going to look at that will enable you to take a capability proposal directly from gate zero to some sort of combined pass, to some sort of second pass. So what does that mean? Well, sometimes it means not everybody's going to get a go. That's real. You know, not everybody's going to have an opportunity. But it actually means Defence has to do a lot more work with industry to understand what industry's capabilities are and to message this stuff properly. So if we intend to use this, if we intend to go down a path, we need to make sure that we're actually communicating with all those people that have a stake in this and make sure that everybody understands what we're doing, why we're doing it. Now, we need to work through that. That is going to be an ongoing challenge for us. So if you can identify any of these criteria, then you might be a chance for a 0 to 2. Like I said, I still think most things initially will be a 2-pass to NSC. I think as we start to get, well, initially it will go to NSC. I think what we'll see is benefit from taking our first pass to NSC and having the second pass decision downgraded, maybe to 2 ministers, again, maybe in the fullness of time to a departmental level. I think there's a real possibility that's true. But there's a lot of stuff we do that makes sense. You've got to have a strategic conversation with government. You've got to outline what your broad options are, particularly if it's something new or novel. You want them to actually understand and be able to influence the outcome. That's a key element of this, is we're not trying to take away any visibility or any opportunity for government to influence the outcome that it's looking for. And then second one here, this really goes to the governance around it. So you can't ask somebody to just trust you without an opportunity to check. So we're making sure that we've got that. I've got these slides, how am I doing for time? I've got these slides up here only because I found them funny. First one is, you don't necessarily need to go through all the gates. You can go around it, right? And I guess what I'm trying to say here is, this is about flexibility. One of the key principles of CLC is about flexibility. It's about not overcomplicating things. It's about taking the most pragmatic approach possible to things. And that's what we're seeking to do. Sometimes you want to go straight across. Sometimes you'll cut across, but you've got to be careful because you might not have understood all your risks and you might run into one of those trees. That could happen. Sometimes you just get stuck and you find you have to go back. Although I see the footprints there, the guys jumped off and kept going through the concrete, which is interesting. And then sometimes there's a really good reason why we have a 1, 2 or a multiple pass. It's because things are difficult, things are complex, things are strategically important, and we probably need to run those paths. Otherwise, we're going to fall off a cliff. And I don't think it requires a lot of imagination to think about the sorts of projects that might fall into that category. And then this one here is, I can't remember which US university, I think it might be Virginia Tech or something, but effectively what they did is they just let the students and faculty walk wherever they needed to, the shortest distance between 2 points, and then they concreted all the pathways up. So this is desire path. So what I'm trying to say is your options are a bit limitless, and it sort of comes down to the characteristics of your own project or your own capability submission or your own program. And we need to be thinking creatively about those things, but we don't want to be taking risks unnecessarily, and we shouldn't be thinking that the default is always going to be 0 to 2 ministers. You need to understand the paradigm on the political side. When 2 ministers make a decision, really 3 ministers, but a defence portfolio minister for finance, that's 2 people who are ultimately accountable for that decision rather than defraying risk across an entire cabinet room. So we need to make sure that what we take forward is appropriate for the level we're trying to get the approval from. I'm probably going to leave it there. I think we're slightly over time. Are we, Dubbo? Yep. We're over time, and we do have a panel session now, so I'd encourage everybody to ask questions. If you want to talk to me about this offline, please do that as well. I hope that's been useful. So thanks very much.